Isn't it strange how some memories stay sharp enough to cut, even after all these years? I'm in my 70s now, but I can still feel the humid summer air of 1982 on my skin. Still hear the screen door slam of my grandparents' lake house. Still taste the wild raspberries I'd been picking that afternoon. I hadn't planned on going to the bait shop, it was an impulse, really. My hands were stained red from the berries, and I remember feeling self-conscious about that when I first saw him. Michael, he wasn't doing anything special, just restocking the crickets and night crawlers, his white t-shirt already marked with the day's work. But when he looked up, those eyes of his caught the late afternoon light streaming through the dusty windows. Something inside me shifted, like the world tilting ever so slightly on its axis. "Can I help you?" he asked, and I nearly laughed at the ordinary question that would end up changing everything. "Just browsing," I said, though I knew nothing about fishing, and had no reason to browse fishing supplies. "I'm staying with my grandparents for the summer." I tucked my berry-stained hands behind my back, trying to appear more sophisticated than I felt. He smiled then, not the polite smile of a shop clerk, but something warmer, something that reached his eyes. "You're the Stevensons' granddaughter. They mentioned you were coming. English major, right?" I was surprised he knew that detail. "Northwestern in the fall," I confirmed, oddly pleased he'd asked about me. "What about you?" "Boston engineering." "Well, hopefully." There was something in his voice when he said hopefully that I didn't understand then. Wouldn't understand for 40 years. "This job's just for the summer, helping save up for school." That summer unfolded like a dream. Michael showed me how to bait a hook, though I never quite got over my squeamishness about it. He taught me the constellations from the hood of his old pickup truck, listened intently as I read him poetry under an ancient oak tree. We shared dreams of travel, careers, the futures we imagined. When he kissed me for the first time, fireflies dancing around us like earthbound stars, I thought I finally understood poetry. "I'll write you every day," I promised as August waned. "Every single day. And I'll wait for every letter," he vowed. The day I left, the sky opened into a sudden downpour. We laughed through our tears, wet to the bone, promising this was just the beginning. Neither of us knew how long that beginning would take. My first weeks at Northwestern passed in a blur of lectures, new friendships, and lengthy letters to Michael. His responses came less frequently but seemed full of his usual warmth, until that October letter that changed everything. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about distance and time. Maybe we should give ourselves some space to grow. College changes people, we both know that." Pride and hurt kept me from responding. I threw myself into my studies, into new friendships, into becoming someone who wasn't defined by a summer romance. When I finally swallowed my pride months later and called the bait shop, they told me Michael had moved away. No forwarding address. Life pulled me forward, as it tends to do. I finished college, earned my master's in literature, and eventually married David, a kind professor who never questioned why I sometimes grew quiet when certain songs played on the radio. We had 2 beautiful daughters, built a comfortable life in Chicago. I published novels, taught creative writing, and tried to convince myself that first loves were meant to be springboards, not destinations. There were moments watching a sunset over Lake Michigan, hearing a song we used to dance to, seeing a constellation Michael had once pointed out when the memories would wash over me unexpectedly. But I built a good life, a full life. When David passed from heart failure when I was 58, I grieved deeply for the partner I'd shared 3 decades with. Then came the alumni fundraising event at Northwestern. I was being honored for my literary contributions, standing at the podium delivering my speech. Then I saw him in the crowd. Silver had replaced the sandy brown of his hair, but those eyes hadn't changed at all. Later, in a quiet corner of the reception, words tumbled out between us. He'd lost his wife Susan to cancer 2 years prior. He'd built a successful engineering firm in California. He had a son, but it was what he said next that changed everything again. "I never understood why you didn't respond to my letter about my mother's illness," he said quietly, "about having to leave school to come home, about wanting to wait for you but not wanting to hold you back." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What letter about your mother?" The truth emerged slowly, then all at once. There had been more pages to that October letter, pages I'd never seen. Pages explaining his mother's cancer diagnosis, his need to drop out and return home, his love for me, despite it all. Pages that had somehow been lost in transit, leaving me with what seemed like a simple breakup note. "I thought you wanted to end things," I whispered. 40 years of misunderstanding crashing down around us. "I was too proud to beg you to reconsider." "And I thought your silence meant you agreed," he replied, his voice rough with emotion, that you'd moved on so icily. We began slowly coffee meetings, long phone calls, emails filled with 4 decades of stories. I told him about naming a character in my second novel after him. He confessed to keeping his telescope pointed at our constellation. All these years, our children met wary at first, then charmed by this unexpected late-life romance. Michael's son recognized the look in his father's eyes, a spark that had been missing since his wife's passing. My daughters saw me laugh in a way they'd never witnessed. A year after our reunion, Michael proposed on the same dock where we'd first met. Now weathered by 4 more decades of seasons, we married in the university chapel on a perfect autumn day. I wore blue, the color of the lake where we'd first fallen in love. Together, we built a new life that honored all we had lived through. We established a scholarship fund for students facing family health crises. We traveled to the places we'd once dreamed of seeing together. On our nightstand sat a jar filled with notes, memories recovered and shared, piecing together the years we'd spent apart. In the evenings, we sit on our porch overlooking Lake Michigan, not speaking of regret but of gratitude. Do you ever wonder what might have been? I asked him recently. Sometimes, he admitted, but then I think of my son, your daughters, all the lives we've touched. We found our way back when we were ready to truly appreciate it. When people ask the secret to our happiness, we always share the same answer. Listen carefully, forgive quickly, and never assume the story is over until the last page. We've had 15 years together now, years filled with grandchildren's graduations, quiet mornings over coffee, travels to distant shores, and nights spent stargazing. I've already written my final letter to him, to be placed in his pocket when that day comes, and he's written one for me. Some people say we lost 40 years, but I don't see it that way. Those years made us who we are, gave us our children, taught us how to love more deeply and forgive more freely. Some things, I've learned, are worth waiting a lifetime for. And when I look at Michael now, silver-haired, and still beautiful to me, I know every step we took, even the ones that led us away, brought us exactly where we were meant to be.